I would hope that people in long-term care would realize our hopes and our goals.
Life is learning.
We have a lot in common with older adults.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Elder Wisdom Stories from the Green Bench. I'm one of your co-hosts, Kathy Buckworth, and along with my co-host, Evelyn Brindle, we are going to be speaking with Heather Luth today. She is the dementia specialist for Schlegel Villages, and we're going to be talking about the philosophy and the program known as Living in My Today, as well as getting to know Heather a little bit better. But before we get into that, Evelyn, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Everything is a beautiful day out there, and I'm looking forward to talking with Heather and you about a very important topic, and that is dementia, and how people relate to it, how they see the world in their present state. And I think everyone will come away with some very good information and helpful ideas this morning.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it from a personal perspective as well, as I have a family member who is dealing with this, and I feel like I don't know enough about it. So let's just get this started. Let's introduce Heather. Heather is with us. Heather, so nice to have you on the show today.
Thank you. It was exciting to be invited.
So Heather, we need to know a little bit about you. So how did this happen? How did you become the dementia specialist for Schlegel Villages?
Well, it was a journey. And of course, a journey starts with that single step. I remember years and years ago when I was at McMaster University and I had been accepted into the social work program. And then I spent a summer, my summer job was in a retirement home. And I had the time of my life. I learned how to crochet in someone's suite. This beautiful woman taught me how to crochet. I had another group teach me how to make jam. And I said, you know what? Social work, great, but I think I need to work with elders. And so that's where it all started. And I've never looked back. It's been such a great time.
Can you tell us a little bit about a program you called Grand Friends? I'm a grandma of 3. I really want to know about this. Can you tell me about that?
Absolutely. So, the next part of my journey, actually, when I was at Schlegel Villages, is I started in their recreation department and I was the volunteer director. And so for me, it was really important to make community connections. We want to make sure that our homes are vibrant parts of the community and that we give our community opportunities to engage with us. So I actually went to a local school, an elementary school, and said, hey, would you be interested in bringing a class to our village? And we would make a partnership. So we would bring the kids in once every month and we would have an activity that we share. So, not kids coming in to perform a song and a dance, but for us to actually do an activity together, because that's when real engagement happens. Do you want to know how I introduced this idea for the school?
Of course.
Okay. I think this is going to surprise you. I don't think you're ready for this. I used a puppet.
I love it.
Yeah. So many, again, good heavens, I've done so many weird things in my life, including going to a clown college day with my husband. He wanted to do clowning to bring 2 children in a hospital. I went to a puppet workshop and I came home with an old man puppet. I called him Grandpa Ernie. He's a very hip happening dude. And Grandpa Ernie and I went to the grade 1 of this local school, and I had Grandpa Ernie, who wasn't able to speak, teach the kids how you can still communicate even when you can't say something. And so they asked questions, and Grandpa Ernie nodded vigorously. And, this was my method of trying to help make sure that the kids were going to feel comfortable when they came to visit our seniors. And that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship and a beautiful program. And so for years and years, right up until COVID, this elementary school, the grade 1 class, came once a month to hang out and to engage and to learn things together. And they would come and they'd show off what they had learned most recently at school, and they would do something together. And that's what we really wanted to promote, was that we can be in life together. We can continue to live life together, that it's not just, old people who are put over there, but that there can be meaningful connections between young and old. So it was something I will always be very proud of. And I continue to have my Grandpa Ernie puppet. He gets pulled out from time to time, and the residents love Grandpa Ernie too. So we've had a lot of fun with that over the years.
Well, I went to circus school, but I've yet to deploy my limited trapeze skills to benefit society. But maybe one day. But I
Oh,
think that I could agree with you, Heather, that the interaction between young and old is so important. I think, Evelyn, we have grandkids. This is important, isn't it?
It definitely is. It certainly has been a help when the grandkids relate and converse with my husband who has dementia. And just being able to talk about sports, which is one aspect that Dave really enjoys, and the boys all do. They can relate with each other, and he talks about their conversations for days afterwards, and it means a lot to him. And the kids, our grandsons, also get a lot out of it because they see Grandpa still with it and can remember and relate to all of the things that they enjoy watching or doing themselves. So it's a good relationship, and everyone needs it. I don't care whether you have dementia or not, we all need that kind of contact with our families. I noticed too, when you were talking, Heather, that you mentioned the word journey an awful lot for yourself, but it's one of the items that I noticed when we were talking about dementia previously, that dementia is actually a journey of change. And that is so very true. Having dealt with dealing with my husband and his dementia, and having seen it in his mother and his sister as well, there is a constant change. It's day to day in many cases, and dealing with that is very not an easy task, I should say, and I think you feel that way too. And that,
absolutely.
yeah, I'm glad to have seen that this program that you're going to be talking to us about, or we'll be discussing, Living in My Today, is so very true and so very helpful, I think, for all of the caregivers, especially, in understanding what is happening, how to deal with it. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this program that Schlegel Villages are introducing.
Absolutely. So, Evelyn, you've nailed the most important thing, the words journey and change. So, that is an integral part of our understanding at Schlegel Villages about dementia. So, when I'm teaching people, in a class about dementia, I usually start by using an analogy. So, I will say to people, have you ever had a really, really bad headache? And if you've had a really bad headache, does it change the way that you perceive the world that is around you? So if you have a bad headache, Kathy, do you need to have your environment change at all? Does noise bother you? What do you think, Kathy? Is that something that happens to you if you've got a headache?
Absolutely. And I think that's a great way to sort of frame this. Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you've got a headache, some people, if they have a migraine, they need a quiet space, noise bothers them. They need to draw the drapes because light bothers them. The smell of cooking bothers them, right? So your experience of the world is actually different when you have a headache. It changes how you perceive and experience the world. And
And from a
so,
physical and mental sort of perspective, correct? Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. So the thing then that I remind people of is that the rest of you don't find the world too noisy or too bright, right? It's just me in that moment because there's a physiological change that's happened in my brain at that moment where I've got that headache. And so it's impacting my experience of the world. And so I like to say that that's what we kind of need to think about when we are thinking about dementia. That dementia, no matter what type, is actually causing a physiological change in people's brains. And that change is actually impacting how they experience and perceive the world around them. So they don't actually see things exactly the same way that you or I do. They don't experience sounds in the exact same way. So then I go one step further and I say, when I have a really bad headache, I can take some Tylenol or, Advil, and I can really improve that headache. The tricky part about dementia is that there's not a wonder drug that is making dementia go away. There's not a wonder drug that takes away all the symptoms, that reverses dementia. And so that's the hard part. So, what we need to do is actually learn about their experience. We need to take a walk in their shoes, if you will, so that we really understand what are the changes that they're experiencing and how can we then support them to be able to live with those changes. So I don't
And
know if that makes sense for you, but sometimes I like to see the world through an analogy. It just makes it feel a little easier to understand.
yeah, I think it really individualizes it, which is, as you've mentioned, is the key sort of to getting to know the person living with dementia as an individual and what they're personally going through. It's like the philosophy of living in my today.
Absolutely. It's unique to each person. In fact, there's a saying that when you know one person who's living with dementia, you know one person who's living
Right.
with dementia. Right? Because there's a lot of information out there about dementia. There's lots of definitions and perspectives about dementia that include a lot of staging language. So whether it's, 3 stages of dementia, 5 or 7, um, but at the end of the day, each person's experience along the way is going to be different based on who they are. You can have someone who has been a very optimistic person their entire life. And that optimism and that is going to shine through even in their experience of dementia. You're going to have a person perhaps who has always been very quiet their entire life, maybe. They've not been a really social person. Well, that's not going to magically change when they are living with dementia. And that also means how we support them has to reflect their personality because suddenly saying, well, they should go to a support group, that may not be something they've ever intended on being a part of. And that's not necessarily going to change now. So we can't support people living with dementia in a one size fits all way because their experience is not only different based on who they are, but it's also different day to day. I think about again, you and I, if we get a really good night's sleep, we are maybe our best self the next day. If we didn't get a good night's sleep, Kathy, you've got a new grandbaby. So if you were looking after that grandbaby, let's say, in the evening and you didn't sleep well, that might impact how you experience the next day. So dementia is not nearly as cut and dried and tidy that we can fit it into a box the way perhaps that we might think it actually works.
I think one of the most difficult parts of it, or this type of dementia that happens, is when a person is withdrawn and doesn't communicate. Um, that it's difficult for both the caregiver and the person's family, and for them too, because they seem to have lost touch with their community, with their family, with anything around them. And it's very difficult dealing with that. But there's so many different things that living in my today, the program itself is offering. And I find that very interesting and very helpful. Uh, Especially since so many of us are facing dementia, either ourselves or with a family member. Um, their program offers like 5 pillars. I know that there, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about those, Heather.
Sure.
That's very interesting.
Sure. I'm happy to tell you about those 5 pillars. And I also want to come back, though, to your comment about communication. So maybe we'll do that first because you were
Okay.
talking for a moment about how hard it is, right? When
Yeah,
our loved one who's living with dementia, when their communication ability changes and when we see them withdrawing. And those are some of those very real and, as you said, difficult symptoms, right, of living with
definitely.
dementia. So,
Yes,
as that dementia journey progresses, we know that people's communication abilities change. And so, very commonly experienced is something called aphasia. And aphasia has 2 types. It's expressive, so it's in the ability to say things and to communicate with others, but it can be understanding what others say. So that's receptive aphasia. So, how do I understand what others are saying? So, it's like a double whammy. So, as people really experience those changes in their ability to communicate, I know that it becomes very disheartening for families. We so badly want to hear the voice of that person who we love. And we want to hear them, say our name. We want them to demonstrate verbally that they're understanding what we're saying. And so it's hard when that ability changes. So what I want to offer to you and to, all of our listeners is that as people are living with advanced, dementia, that journey is advancing, they're further along. We want to think about the fact that communication has changed. They still have the ability to communicate, but they are doing that in nonverbal ways. And so, we have people who are maybe better able to understand your gestures and your body language and your facial expression than they are able to understand your words, right? Because words become that tricky part that we may not be able to understand. And then the other thing is, I love a tip that Dr. Alan Power actually offers, where he says, regardless of the fact that the other person's communication abilities have changed, yours haven't. So it becomes our job to make sure that we are communicating with them and that we're changing the way that we communicate with them to give them the best opportunity to understand us. So we need to really slow down. We need to slow down, and we need to use things like one verb sentences. So we're just going to have a sentence with one verb so that that person can hear us, listen, and understand before we add the next sentence. We're not very good at pausing. I was doing this exercise last week in a training session, and we actually had a timer, and I had a PSW who was supposed to talk to another PSW who was taking the part of the resident. And I asked her to use a one verb sentence and to give the resident 10 seconds to answer back. Now, 10 seconds does not seem like a long time. Am I right?
Right. No.
Yeah. But you know what? The person who was the PSW with the one verb sentence, she couldn't wait. She ended up needing to give 3 sentences in that 10-second period. And what I had to then say to her was, every time you start over with a new sentence, with another verb, you're asking that person to start all over understanding what you're saying. And so, wow, that means that it's
So
going to be a lot more tricky, right? For them to understand and to respond to you.
so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have to really think about how are we communicating with people and can we change how we communicate? So at the end of the day, remember they can always hear you. And so you're the one who can be communicating with them and reassuring them that, you love them. You're there for them.
And I know that all of our listeners now are very curious to know after that. That was wonderful. They're very curious to know now, what are the 5 pillars of Living in My Today program? If you could walk us through those, Heather, that would be terrific.
Absolutely. So we do have 5 pillars. Our first pillar is supportive approaches to care. And so this is where we are looking at understanding our residents first as people. We always want to start from that place of understanding each person as a unique individual with strengths and perspectives and a story that defines them. The second part of that pillar is really understanding, what does it mean to live with dementia? How does dementia affect our senses and our memory and our communication ability and, all of those things that impact our day-to-day experience. And then we actually teach people, how do we connect with our loved ones who are living with dementia? How can we continue to have a relationship, and how can we create partnership moments where people living with dementia can continue to be active in the care moments that are part of their life, living within the village. So that's supportive approaches to care. Next up, we have enjoyable meal times, and we eat 3 times a day. So our meals are a big part of every day. So how can we offer those meals in new ways? How can we support residents to be as independent as possible? Do you want to have to know one of the simplest changes that we teach people in our villages? So I have worked in long-term care for 25 years. And typically we set the tables, we have breakfast with our residents, we clean up, and we right away set the table for lunch, and then we close the dining room door, and then we head, to wash the dishes. And so we've got this table that is set for lunch already at 10 or 10:30 in the morning. And what happens is, whenever a person who's living with dementia, who perhaps doesn't know exactly what time of the day it is, they see that table and they go, oh, it must be time for lunch. And so they go in and they sit down and they wait at the table. And sometimes they get a little annoyed. This is the worst service I've ever had. Yeah, imagine, where is my waitress? Right? And so the simplest thing that we teach is, stop setting the tables that far before a meal. You should only set a table between 20 minutes to 15 minutes ahead of the meal. And when you set the table, it will create a natural cue that will invite your residents to know and understand that you're about to have a meal. That costs you nothing. That
Interesting.
costs you nothing. Isn't that fantastic?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, they're very important.
Yeah, so that's enjoyable meal times. We have another pillar that is called meaningful and active engagement, and again, we are trying to teach all of our team members and our family members and our residents that just as food is important to nourish our physical body, engagement is what nourishes our mind and our spirit. And so we want to provide opportunities that are not just in a calendar. I don't just do the things that are in my calendar, do you?
Not always.
No, you have lots of spontaneity, right? That happens within your day. When you see the newspaper sitting on the table, you pick it up to read it. You don't have to have newspaper time listed on your calendar. So that's again us reframing what has been a very institutional approach to engagement and saying, how can engagement just become more of a normal, natural part of every day? How can we provide opportunities for people living with dementia to be surrounded by those cues that will naturally help to engage them? And then we did also develop 10 Living in My Today leisure programs that are just they are the most exciting thing. And again, they are looking at engaging our residents in specific programs. I think my favorite one I could tell you about is called Express Yourself. And I remember when we were developing that program, we had a lot of feedback from team members and residents saying, well, they liked crafts, but then we had men who say, I don't want to go to a craft program. And so they wanted to go to a program where they could be themselves in a creative way, but it sounds too feminine if it's called crafts. And so actually, it was residents who chose the name Express Yourself. And now our Express Yourself program has become this beautiful blend of different ways that people can be creative. So that's a really fun part of that pillar. We also have a pillar that is called Empowered Care Partners, which is where we are recognizing and honoring that um, family members and team members and volunteers and students and residents all have a part to play in supporting people living with dementia. And we do that by providing really good education and providing opportunities for people to connect and to collaborate and share their stories together. So that is part of our Empowered Care Partners. We're really excited about a new tool we've developed to use within that pillar that's called our Gather groups. I can tell you more about that if you're interested. And then our final pillar is thoughtful design. So it's acknowledging that the way we design our physical building, the decor we use, the furniture, all of that plays a part in supporting people who are living with dementia.
This is such great information and such a great way to sort of work your way through the journey. But from a personal perspective, Heather and I referenced this at the beginning. If someone's just starting to, you're realizing that they're dealing with dementia, how do you have those conversations with them if they have not sort of admitted to themselves that it's there? Is that something that's been part of your experience as well?
Absolutely. I think first of all, it's really hard to recognize that you're changing and admit that maybe there is something happening. And then you add to that perhaps a little known or understood symptom of dementia that is actually anosognosia, where you don't understand. You aren't aware that you are actually changing. And so that also means that it might be really different. Someone might never really believe that they have dementia. So that makes things even more tricky, right?
Mhm. Absolutely.
People believe that they are fine and that there's nothing wrong. And so it takes a lot of insight, um, for people to be able to recognize the changes that are happening. And that means sometimes, yeah, we end up having some really difficult conversations.
Absolutely. I did want to step back and really talk about the gather groups as well. I just had that question that was on the top of my mind. So can you give us a little bit of information about the gather groups?
Yeah, you know what? Gather groups are our approach to offering support. So for years and years at Schlegel Villages, we tried to come up with, how do you run a support group? And who runs the support group, and what does a support group look like? And that's a difficult thing. So we actually worked together with a team. So we had a small team working with us. We had a researcher from the Research Institute for Aging in Waterloo, Dr. Jane Kipfer. She was part of our support group. I guess you'd call it a support group for developing support groups. How do you like that?
Perfect.
And so together we were able to kind of come up with, what is the need that we see? And we identified 3 different areas of need. So we identified that there is, it's a big transition when you move to long-term care or retirement living. And so you need to talk about that transition. And the best people to talk about that with are people who have experienced it, are sharing that experience. So we developed a group that's for life transitions. We also found there's a lot of people who are grieving when they move in. So people who are grieving a change in their abilities, changes in their relationships, things that they had to give up. Maybe a person had to give up a pet, or gave up their license, or gave up hosting Christmas dinner, right? When they moved into long term care or into retirement living. And so we have a grief and loss group. And then finally, we also wanted to honor how difficult the caregiver journey is. And so we have a caregiver version of the group as well. So we've developed all the tools that are required for running this group. We have a really great format that we follow, which creates predictability. And that predictability is what helps people who are attending to feel safe in sharing their story and their emotions. And then we've just been really encouraged to see the stories and the connections building between the people who are attending. And that's what this is all about. Because, we might work at Schlegel Villages, but we don't share that experience from their perspective. And so the best people who can support them are people who share their journey. So we're really, really excited about those gather groups that have started to happen in our villages.
Good. Are they introducing most of these programs throughout all of the villages? Or is it slowly happening in various ones, or one program at a time?
Oh gosh, what a great question, Evelyn. It's hard when you've got 19 villages and you're trying to introduce something new. So all
Definitely.
of the villages received a gather kit in February of this year. And then we hosted our first training session for gather facilitators in February. We held another one in March, and then we did another one in May. So we are seeing villages slowly getting started with this, because you have to identify who's going to facilitate, how are you going to communicate this, and so it's a process. So our goal is to have gather groups up and going in all of our villages by the end of this year. So it's a great question, Evelyn, about all of living in my today. How do you make this massive program, gain traction across 19 villages who might be, in different places and spaces and different moments in time? And so the answer really is, it's gradual. It's gradual in how you build capacity within the village for people to learn these new concepts and ways of doing things. remember I told you about meaningful and active engagement. Well, we have 15 recreation teams right now who are attending online training, and they've been working hard, meeting with me every month since September of last year to learn. They've just received some kits with some new resources. And so, again, you can see it takes time. So, this is the journey that we are on, a journey of changing how we support people who are living with dementia in our villages.
And now that we've gone through the nuts and bolts, which you've explained so beautifully, and the pillars, can you tell me, Heather, why is it called Living in My Today, and how is it also a philosophy, not just a program?
Oh, what a no. You're just full of good questions today. I guess that's
We're
why
so
you do what
curious.
you do, eh? So when I look at our logo, right, living in my today, I love each of those words individually. So, first of all, living. The program is about living. It's about continuing to grow and to experience life. It's not life is over. It's the people who have dementia continue to live. So they are in fact living. And then the next word is in and my. So, where are they doing the living? It's in their reality, it's in their experience, it's in their today. I think often dementia programs can be focused in yesterday, because we talk about people are able to remember yesterday, then they're better than they're able to remember today. But the thing is that a person who's living with dementia isn't static, and they're not only that person of yesterday. They can continue to change. Did you know that for instance, people's tastes and what they enjoy eating can change when they are living with dementia? So you might say, well, they used to really enjoy a fruit salad for dessert, and now they really enjoy a chocolate brownie. And I mean, who doesn't? And that's because their tastes have changed. So, do we only keep giving them a fruit salad because that's what they liked yesterday? Or do we honor the fact that they are continuing to live today, and their experience today means they want to have a chocolate brownie? That's what living in my today is about. It's about recognizing and honoring that people who are living with dementia continue to be living, and they continue to or they should be able to continue making choices and having relationships and friendships. They should be able to continue engaging in activities, and maybe they want to try something they never tried in their life because now they're not intimidated or they're not feeling inhibited to try something new. So, living in my today is really about just that. We need to recognize that people who are living with dementia are in their own experience of the world, and our job is to come alongside them. They're not living in our today. It was not called living in our today. And it was also not called living in our today to say that all people living with dementia are the same. It's my today, recognizing each person's experience is their own. So
I
let's
feel
honor that.
And I that's such great advice, especially as I say, personally, I'm going through this journey with someone who's just entering, and we have a lot of focus on yesterday.
Yeah.
I feel like we've only just sort of, touched the surface of a lot of these programs and philosophies, Heather. So if people who are listening want to get in touch or find out more about the program, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can check out our website because our Living in My Today dementia program has some information there. So that is a great place to look for information about us and to learn from our experience. So that's probably the best place for people to find that information.
One of the things that was mentioned in some of the program, um, was called the stoplight approach, and I couldn't find anything more about that. What is that?
Oh, Evelyn, we did have such a good conversation that day, you and I. I think we could have talked for hours.
Oh, you're right.
We should have ordered in takeout. My goodness. Well, the stop light approach is actually a unique approach that we teach our team members to respond to people in the moment when they are experiencing extreme distress. So, you may have heard that sometimes people who are living with dementia can be, these nasty words, like they can become aggressive or
Oh, yes.
angry or upset. And I like to think about that differently and say, well, a person who's living with dementia definitely experiences distress. And when they're experiencing distress, they need to let us know that. And they do that by using actions and words to tell us, right, how they're feeling. The tricky piece is that because it makes us uncomfortable when we see someone in distress, we sometimes come and we want to manage their distress. We kind of want to make it go away. And in doing that, sometimes the person feels like we don't truly understand. We haven't validated what they're feeling. We're just trying to make them stop doing whatever it is they're doing. The stoplight approach says that that's not going to work. When a person is in an extreme moment of distress, the first thing we need to do is actually stop, just like a stoplight. Stop what you're doing. Stop what you're doing if you're in the middle of, you know, you say you're helping your husband David and you're putting on his shoes and suddenly he is kicking you. Well, you need to say, I need to stop what I'm doing and understand, what is David trying to tell me? Maybe the shoe is too tight. Maybe I'm going too quickly, right? So number one, we need to stop what we're doing. Number two, we need to use some caution, right? That orange light. We use some caution because otherwise, if you run an orange light, you could get hit by somebody else, right? Or
Right.
you could hit a pedestrian or, a cyclist. So you stop what you're doing and then you use some caution to just pause and think about the situation you're in and go, again, what are they trying to tell me? How can I make sure that they are going to be safe and that I am also going to be safe in this moment of distress? And then the green part of the stoplight approach is the positive approaches that we teach people to use in guiding their response. And one of the key ones is actually validating someone's distress. And that's something that miraculously we haven't always been taught. We've been taught how to redirect distress. We've been taught how to distract people, but we haven't always been taught how to validate someone. So here's just my example for you. A quick example. If you've lost your cell phone, which I do regularly, if I've lost my cell phone, is it helpful for my husband to say, oh, don't worry about it, it'll turn up?
Not really.
Okay, so next, I want to hear, what do you think about this? What if my husband says to me, oh, don't worry about it right now. Here, sit down and have a cup of tea. Will that make it better?
No.
No, but you'd be
No.
able to
They should just
enjoy
stop
it.
talking at this point. Yeah.
Right. And in fact, yes, I'm going to become more and more angry. Right. And so that's where it would be far more helpful for my husband, in this case, to say, you've lost your cell phone. Well, that's annoying, isn't it? Let me see if I can help you find it. That's what validation does. So that's just an example of one of those green light approaches that we teach as part of the stoplight approach to supporting people in distress. So again, it's that idea of how do we reframe things so people can understand. We want to keep things simple. For people, in the stoplight helps people understand in a new and a different way.
Heather, I feel like we could do a 10-part docuseries with you on this program, on everything that you do for the people at Schlegel Villages. But sadly, our time is coming to a close. We can't. But again, people can go to schlegelvillages.com to find more of that information. And thank you so much for being a part of our Elder Wisdom Stories from the Green Bench podcast. On behalf of Evelyn and myself, we truly appreciate it and hope that everyone listening will go back and listen to more episodes if they find us on the podcast at Elder Wisdom Stories from the Green Bench. Thank you, Heather.
And thank you. Thanks, Evelyn. Good to chat with you again.
Yes, always, Heather. Look forward to another time.
And just a reminder to our listeners that Dr. Jane Kipper was a guest on the podcast earlier, episode 49. So do yourself a favor and go back and listen to her words of wisdom.
Elder Wisdom, Stories from the Green Bench, is brought to you by Schlegel Villages, a complete continuum of care, offering independent living to long-term care, celebrating and honoring the wisdom of the elder. To learn more about us, please go to our website, schlegelvillages.com.